Hello, my name is Roger Bjornstad. I am the chief economist in the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions. It's also called LO. I'm here today to talk about the Norwegian model. It's a model for organizing society, and I have renamed the model to the Norwegian supermodel. And that is just to remind us that it's not only a model for the past, it's also a model for the future. And the title is inspired by this front page of The Economist, which referred to the Nordic models as the next supermodel. And why is it a supermodel? Well, it's because it's combining social issues with economic growth. So we're both handling two of the most severe challenges in society today. Both establishing high economic growth and full employment, but also distributing the economic growth evenly to the whole population. Unions in Norway was first established in 1882. But you can say that the first step towards a model for the society was taken when the unions came together in confederations. And LO, the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions, were established in 1899. And already the year after, in 1900, the Confederation of Employer Organizations were established as a response to the workers organizing in a confederation. The first decision for LO was to work for work, housing, and education. Imagine that this is more than 120 years ago, and we still do work for the same issues today. That says something about what matters for workers and common people, and the challenges they have in the society. The first years were mainly marked by very large disputes between the labor organizations and the employer organizations. So there was this long period with a lot of disputes, and we had strikes, and we had large lockouts from the employer sides. And the initiative to form trade tariff agreements was made by the workshops and the manufacturing workers first. So the first national-wide tariff agreement came into place in 1907, where the workers in manufacturing and their employers agreed upon the first national-wide agreement. It regulated the minimum wages, but that's all. But most importantly, they also regulated the right to organize and the right to do union work at the workplace. But the next milestone in turning ahead towards a model for the society, where the two confederations on the workers' side and the employer side came to an agreement upon the main agreement, regulating how to organize workers, organize wage negotiations, and so forth, in 1935. This agreement is pretty much the same today, with only minor revisions. Some of the most important things that were agreed upon in 1935 were the peacetime. We were not allowed to strike or do any other means to force our demands in the period between the negotiations. And we had 2-year agreements, and we had a peacetime in these 2 years. And another important point in this agreement was the right to manage from the employer side. That means that, okay, we are negotiating wages each second year and also in the year between. But then the employers have the right to manage the workforce. And that was a very important measure taken to reach this agreement, and it's a very important institutional mechanism also in the wage negotiations that we have today. So, okay, before the Second World War, we had confederations of trade unions, confederations of employer organizations, and we had this main agreement on how to organize labor union activity, negotiations, and so forth. But the next step towards a model for the society came, so to speak, in the 1960s first. Because during the after World War II period, we experienced, as in many other countries, high inflation rates and high wage growth. And in Norway, we had this parliamentary election in 1965, where the prime minister that were elected, he promised to solve the problem with rising inflations without increasing unemployment. And I've tried to illustrate this in this figure, because in wage setting, we have this trade-off between unemployment and the wage level. When the unemployment level is very low, workers have very strong bargaining power and can drive up wages. And when unemployment is high, wages tend to fall relatively, as illustrated here. But on the other side, employers set their prices to the consumers. And this is often set as a markup above costs, above the wage costs. And the markup tend to be higher the lower the unemployment. And when the markup is high, inflation grows high and real wages fall. So that tends to be an opposite development of the real wage unemployment level. And you can see from this figure that only in equilibrium, wage setting and price setting agrees on the correct wage level. But during the after World War II period, we had very high demands building the country after the war. Everybody was in work, unemployment was very low, and as you can see from this figure, that means that the wage setters and the price setters did not agree on the correct level of wages, and we had wage spirals, wage price spirals, and loss of competitiveness. So this was the reality that Per Borten, which was the prime minister candidate for the 1965 elections, faced, and he promised the voters to solve this puzzle without increasing unemployment. So what did he do when he won the election? He had to deliver. Well, he said that in order to keep inflation low, wage growth in accordance to international competitiveness, we need to know what is the right or the correct wage level, or what is the correct wage growth. And of course, this is not an easy task to find out what is the correct wage growth. It depends, of course, on a lot of factors. But one factor is more important than any other factors in small economies trading with the rest of the world, and it is the competitiveness. And all countries which trade with other countries need to have a wage level not too high so that they lose their competitiveness. So this was a problem facing all countries. And then you have two choices. You can either leave it up to the labor market to fix this wage growth. But the labor markets tend then to do this at a very high unemployment level. And Per Borten had other ambitions. He wanted to fix this wage level at a low unemployment rate. So he gave this puzzle to a head of research department in Statistics Norway called Odd Aukrust. He led the white paper committee who had a task to find out about the correct wage growth in Norway in 1965. When you read about the Norwegian model in academics, you can often hear that it's referred to as the Aukrust model. So this is the reason why it's often called the Aukrust model, after Odd Aukrust. The answer to Per Borten was, and this is a quote from the report, Aukrust says that the wage level must be along the main course. And that is another name for the Norwegian model that you might read about in academic papers, the main course model. The main course is the trends in the domestic wage and price levels that provide one out of two, normal ownership income in competitive industries, and number two, a normal relationship between the wage level in the service industries and the wage level in manufacturing. So he states that you have to fulfill two criteria and this is a theoretical model. So in theory, every country has to face two criteria for the wage setting. First, you must secure international competitiveness in the international product markets. And in order to do that, the owner income in competitive industries must be high enough. The surpluses in the manufacturing industry must be high enough. Otherwise, they go out of business and we are losing export industries and the trade balance will be negative eventually. But the other criteria is that the manufacturing industries, in order to be competitive, also must compete in the domestic labor market. And to keep their competitiveness in the domestic labor market, wages in the service industries cannot increase or be de-linked to the wage growth in the manufacturing industries. And this was actually an insight, because we had earlier focused on international competitiveness in the international markets, but we did not focus on, in the wage setting scheme, that you also had to have a link between the domestic wage level in services and the wage level in manufacturing industries. So this was a theoretical insight, linking international competitiveness to the domestic labor market. Then the work had to be done to make this theoretical model also a practical model. We had to organize our wage negotiations so that they could link the international competitiveness to the domestic labor market. A lot of institutions needed to be in place. We already had some institutions with the national confederations, both on the workers' side and on the employers' side. But in order to have, the manufacturing industry setting the wages so that the service industries could follow them, we needed a 2-year that the 2-year tariff agreements were in the right order. So, in order to incorporate this theoretical model, wage negotiations in the manufacturing industries must be conducted first. And in Norway, these agreements, they have a deadline on March 31st each year. The rest of the private sector has the same termination of their agreements, but they will always wait until the manufacturing industries are finished negotiating before they are concluding their negotiations. And then the public sector agreements, they terminate April 30th each year. So they will naturally also wait for the private sector to be finished negotiations before they conduct their negotiations. So the order of the wage negotiations are a very important institutional feature for managing to establish this model for wage negotiations into a theoretical, into a practical model for implementing these institutional features. But there are other important institutional features as well. A lot of them were already at place when Aukrust launched his theories. We had the contract committee established already in 1962. The labor court and what we call the Riksmeklingsmannen, the ombudsman, was established already in 1915 because of the disputes I was talking about earlier. And the National Wage Board, which is a meeting between the government and the parties in the labor market, was established already in 1952. And then, as a consequence of the Aukrust report, the technical committee was established in 1967 to make material about the situation in the labor market and the economy, to agree upon what is the current situation in the economy and the labor market, so that this will not be a topic in the wage negotiations. And this technical committee is doing their work before the wage negotiations each year. I will also point out that Statistics Norway is a very important institutional feature of the Norwegian model as well, because they produce macroeconomic models and analysis that supports this way of thinking about the wage setting and the labor market. So, was this a success? Let's see how it turns out. We remember that point 1 was that we had normal ownership income in the competitive industries. And we can see from this figure that, of course, there are variations in ownership income. And by the way, this is the inverse of ownership income, is the labor share of value added, but the rest up until 100 is the ownership share of value added. And we can see that there are fluctuations, but there are fluctuations around a pretty constant mean. So yes, ownership income is secured in the Norwegian model. And point B here is that we had to have normal relationship between the wage level in the service industries and the wage level in manufacturing. And here I found some figures going back to the 1970s about wage growth all together in the blue line, the manufacturing workers in the red line, and here the government workers, employees in the black line. And we can see that the wage growth is practically identical between all groups. So this model where the manufacturing industries are negotiating first has been called the frontline model in Norway. And it says, stripped down to its basics, that the manufacturing wage growth is determined by the productivity growth in the manufacturing industries, and that the wage growth in service sectors are following the wage growth in manufacturing industries. So you can see this equality here. And the first equality, secure competitiveness in international product markets, because wage level in the manufacturing industries is determined by the productivity levels in the same industries. And the second equality secures competitiveness in a domestic labor market, because wages in service industries, that is both private and public, will not exceed the wage growth in manufacturing industries. So this way of conducting wage negotiations, you might say it's like a centralized model of wage negotiations, or at least very highly coordinated between sectors, has received some criticism, and did for many, many years, especially within economics, in academia, and the critique is that it's intervening into the free labor market, hindering labor mobility, and will probably reduce economic growth. But the result of this intervening of the labor markets and wage setting has shown to be the opposite. It has been a boost to economic growth. And I'll tell you why. So you might say that what I've talked about so far is how we conduct wage settlements, is the core of the Norwegian model for society. Let me talk a little bit about the consequences. And I've grouped the consequences into two separate issues. You might call it one issue is the consequences, institutional consequences, and one issue is the economic or the more market consequences. And if we look at the market consequences first, controlling the market for wages. Is it so, as was said, that this will hinder labor mobility, reducing economic growth? No, it's on the contrary, because much more important than labor mobility is to enhance investment in technology, competence, and capital mobility, and even raising trust in a more democratic sense. And small wage differentials, small or a high level of inequality will enhance these things. I come back to that. And I'll also come back to another important feature about the Nordic model or the Norwegian model. It's the welfare state. And the welfare states, it's insurance for disability, sickness, and unemployment. And if you have that insurance, you also take risk, and it also enhances labor mobility. So it's not true that the Norwegian model is hindering labor mobility, but even so, it's actually promoting capital mobility, capital formation, investment in technology, investment in competence. And the later years, we also learned that the value of trust is very important for economic growth. So why do the Norwegian model produce more technology, more capital formation, and more competence? There are a lot of mechanisms at play here. But if we focus what is happening within the companies, we produce small wage differentials. That means that the low-skilled workers are highly paid relatively to in other regimes for wage negotiations. And with high minimum wages, there are large incentives for the owners of businesses to invest in labor-saving processes and technology and ways to organize the labor force so that you can produce more with less or fewer unskilled people. So it's a very strong incentives for owners of businesses to invest in competence and invest in technology because of the high minimum wage level. And another economic consequence on more industrial level is that it secures a business structure that promote high productivity businesses, and there are capital mobility in the society where capital is always seeking the solutions that produce the higher productivity levels, the higher technology levels. Because wage flexibility, as opposed to wage rigidity, as we have in Norway, will make businesses with a low productivity level negotiate down wages and survive longer than in the regime of wage rigidity. So if you are a business with problems on your productivity or competitiveness, you cannot go to the unions and ask them to reduce their wages so you can survive these problems. You have to produce solutions to increase productivity level, otherwise you go out of business. And in the Norwegian model, we say that it's okay to go out of business if you have to compete with lower wages. It's better that you go out of business and you can put your capital elsewhere in the high technology industries. And that is a reason why the business structure in Norway is very productive, high capital intensive, and high technology intensive. And we have also learned that the Norwegian model that produces small wage differentials, a high minimum wage level, produces a high level of trust and the ability to cooperate, to solve problems together and find compromises and find solutions. It also produces a flat organized way to organize a flat structure on how to organize work. And this flat organizing structure is enhancing employer-driven innovations. And it's enhancing problem solution abilities, is enhancing compromise willingness, both at the industry level, at the company level, and at the societal level. So in Norway, we have very high levels of trust. And high levels of trust is very important to reach good solutions that everybody can agree on. There are some international comparison on trust. And as you can see from this figure, which is taken from an OECD report, you can see all the Nordic countries on top of trust levels. And it's only in the recent years that we learned that trust is a very important economic driving force. Producing high productivity levels. This figure shows the productivity in each country, and in the United States is 100 here. So you can see that Norway is the most productive country in the world. Here we have adjusted for international exchange rates, and as you know, the Norwegian krone has been a little bit weaker the recent year because of the oil prices has fallen. And before we had a 20% higher productivity level than the United States, because we have adjusted for this weaker krona, we can see that it's still above, but just a little bit above the United States productivity level. But still, the Norwegian workers are the most productive workers in the world. And also in comparing technology levels, Norway always scores high compared to other countries. So our working life is recognized by a high level of technology, high level of skilled workers, high level of productivity. I wanted to mention another mechanism from, controlling or intervening in wage setting that produces high economic growth. And it's investment in competence, education. This figure shows the investment in training, on-the-work training for those with the lowest skill levels. And as you can see, again, the Nordic countries are on the top. And Norway is, in this statistics, the country in the world where the low-skilled workers are receiving the most training on the job. And of course, that's because we have a very high minimum wage level, making strong incentives for employers to invest in training and upgrading skills. So that is why intervening in wage setting produces high economic growth and not low level of growth, as some thought. The other set of consequences of the Norwegian models is what I called institutional consequences. And of course, when we have Confederation of Trade Unions, Confederation of Employer Organizations together, the government also has a tool to implement change in a way that has a high level of trust, high level of involvement from the people or the workers, and it's a tool to reach agreements and compromises on a societal level. But having unions in the businesses is also a tool to implement change at the business level. So this is another consequence that is very important to explain the Norwegian success. The tripartite cooperation as a policy tool to solve problems, reach compromises, and enhance changes. On the societal level, you can, for example, have a pension reform involving the Confederation of Trade Unions, the employers, agree upon a reform so that we can have a more sustainable economic development when the population gets older, as it does in all countries. We have a tripartite cooperation of gender equality, inclusive employment where sick and people with disabilities can enter the labor market. And we have a tripartite cooperation on education and a lot of other issues, industrial policies, for example. But I also set up a list here for the business level because businesses in Norway report that they see a high value of having a union at the business level so that they can implement change as well. Either if they have problems and need to restructure their business, downsize even, or if they have to raise competence or recruit new workers. They find that the cooperation between the union and themselves are very constructive. And as a consequence of both intervening in wage setting and producing compromises on issues and problems at the societal level, the Nordic countries and Norway is the most equal countries in the world, as you can see from this Gini coefficient as I put up here. So this sums up the front page of Economist in 2013 on why the Nordic models and the Norwegian model is a super model. It produces high economic growth and distributes its growth equally among the whole population. So it's both economically and socially sustainable, as opposed to many other models for organizing society, where we can see yellow vests in France, we can see Brexit in the UK, we can see right-wing parties marching ahead in many countries, and demonstrations in the street. In Norway and the Nordics, we come together to solve our problems in compromises and dialogue. Last, I just wanted to say that, of course, this is this model. It is not a model that hides our disputes. We have disputes, but we have a way of organizing and solving our disputes. But the model rests on a set of assumptions in order to work. And this is a continuously work that we have to do every day, remind ourselves that we have this way of solving problems, because we, as in all other countries in the world, have problems we need to solve each day. So this set of institutional conditions are very important to maintain in the Norwegian model. I group these conditions in three bubbles on the on the left-hand side. You can see here, we need collective agreements. Without the collective agreements, we cannot coordinate wage negotiations across sectors. We need policy that works together with the parties in the labor market and not opposing them. For example, we need a welfare state Because without the welfare state, we cannot accept that people should, or that workers should accept downsizing, for example. But we do accept downsizing because we have an income security scheme in our welfare state. So those wanting to weaken the welfare state is also risking the Norwegian model. And we do need strong institutions where we can come together, talk about our problems, and solve our problems, and agreeing on compromises. So this sums up the Norwegian model. Some conditions for it to work: collective agreements, a worker-friendly policy, and institutions that can implement the Norwegian model. The core of the model is Norwegian wage setting, where we coordinate wage setting across sectors, and the manufacturing industry sets the pace, and the service sectors follow. And the consequences, if we can manage this, is small wage differentials, small inequality, producing high economic growth, and is a measure for implementing policies for change. Thank you very much.